My brittle bone condition and the over 100 bones I've broken are the best things that have ever happened for me. In life, we have a choice. Do we see the things that happen as those that happen to us or those that happen for us? Your mindset determines your path. And while I may be fragile, I have chosen to have an unbreakable mindset. I was born in a small town in Northeast Georgia in the summer of 1996. And immediately after I was born, the doctors noticed that I had a broken leg. They thought this was odd, but they figured it was a problem with the umbilical cord, and I was allowed to go home. Late one night, my mom was up burping me when she heard what could only be described as the sound of a chicken bone snapping, followed by my screaming. This led to a trip to the ER and an x-ray that would confirm I now had a broken arm. 2 fractures, and I wasn't even 2 weeks old. Something wasn't right. The doctors ran many tests, and a sample of my skin would give them answers. She will never sit, crawl, stand, walk, and that's as she lives past infancy. This was the sentence uttered as my parents were delivered the news that I had a condition called Osteogenesis Imperfecta, more commonly known as brittle bones disease. My parents were delivered every worst-case scenario that day, but they were not about to let me become the textbook definition of a diagnosis. So instead, they focused on the things they could control. They researched therapies and specialists, and at 6 months old, I had my first physical therapy appointment. And this appointment would change the course of my life. The physical therapist took me out of my parents' arms and said to them, "You can put her in a bubble, or you can let her live and experience all the good and bad that will come in her life." And with that, our lives went on. Ordinary life in the Coan household looked just like that. Ordinary. I had chores and responsibilities just like my brothers, and I was expected to be a functioning member of the family, no matter my physical state. Long drives from our home in Northeast Georgia to Atlanta were a staple in my childhood, and these were for doctor's appointments and physical therapy appointments. But I didn't mind it. Physical therapy felt like fun and games to me, but I didn't realize the fun games were actually exercises to help strengthen my bones and improve my motor skills and coordination. And that PT would be a success. Every milestone they said I would never hit in life slowly but surely came. I crawled, I stood. One day, I took my first steps and I started walking. The physical therapist was so encouraged by this that she told my parents to get me in the water for further therapy. And as luck or fate would have it, a pool opened up right down the road from us in our small hometown. It had a lap pool and a therapy pool. I would join an aquatherapy class for kids with disabilities while my brothers joined the swim team. And from the very first class, I was hooked on the feeling of freedom that I felt in the water. It was as if I could shed every fear of breaking and finally be myself. But one day, during aquatherapy, I caught myself watching the lap pool and wondering to myself, why can't I be on the swim team? I want to be over there. So when my mom came to get me from the lesson, I looked up at her and I said, "Mom, I want to join the swim team." And she said, "Okay, let's do it." She took my life jacket off, we threw it in the trash, and I got in the lap pool and swam the 1 lap requirement to join the team. That very next day, I was training with all the other kids, and not long after, I was competing against able-bodied kids. And I loved the feeling of being underestimated by my able-bodied competitors because they only saw me for my disability, rather than my abilities in the water. One girl even exclaiming after a race, "The girl in the wheelchair beat me." Swimming started to give me the confidence to own who I was, both in and out of the water. But I was still dealing with a serious physical condition. And life of brittle bones can be described in one word: unpredictable. I never knew when my next fracture was coming. But in the midst of all the unpredictability, swimming became my constant, my structure, my routine. No matter what fracture I was dealing with, I always knew I could get in the water. It just had to be a little creative. If I had a broken arm, I could get in and kick. If I had a broken leg, I could get in and pull. No or not possible was not a part of my vocabulary. And this is where I first started to see my unbreakable mindset develop, because I started viewing these challenges as things that were happening for me rather than to me. And this mindset would serve me well, not only in dealing with my condition, but in life and in swimming. So I kept competing, and one day I was at a local competition when two swimming officials approached me and told me about the Paralympics. Para, meaning parallel to the Olympics, is the same elite worldwide sporting competition held in the same venues on the same 4-year cycle just 2 weeks after the conclusion of the Olympics. The big difference being is that at the Paralympics, every athlete competing has a physical disability. I went home that night and I researched the Paralympics online, and in front of me on the computer screen, I saw people who looked like me, competing for their countries and winning medals. And this told me that I could do the same thing. So I boldly looked up at my parents and said, "Mom, Dad, I'm going to win a gold medal one day." That very next day, we found a Georgia Parasport program and I joined. I started competing all over the country and I had big dreams of representing our country on the world stage at the Paralympic Games. And my big break, pun intended, would come in 2012. I was at the London 2012 trials, fully expecting to qualify for my first national team. But I would go on to not only qualify for the national team, but to qualify for my first Paralympic Games and my best event, the 400 freestyle, on the day of my 16th birthday. That was better than any license or car I could get. I spent that entire summer preparing for the London Games, and I'll never forget arriving in London, seeing the village for the first time, and the pool. But I'll especially never forget walking out for my first Paralympic final. But as I was getting out of the water after finishing 6th in the final, I couldn't shake this feeling of wanting more. I was grateful for this experience, but I wanted to be on the podium in 4 years. So I left the London Games, motivated to continue training and looking towards the Rio Games. But these 4 years would be really important because I would be starting college in the middle of it. And my college search would include more questions than just that of the campus, the academics, the cafeteria. Mine would include questions like, is the campus accessible? How close is the nearest hospital? And can I get the necessary accommodations here? I found everything I needed and more at Loyola University, Maryland. There, my dream of competing as part of a Division I college program and getting a great education would be realized. But still, I didn't realize that life on my own with the whole disability thing 600 miles away would be as difficult as it was. And that first semester was full of a lot of learning curves. But the second semester, I found my stride. I was doing well academically, and I even qualified for that summer's World Championships in Scotland, a competition that would see me win my first international medal. I had a lot of great momentum as we looked towards the Rio Games in the next year. But I got my reminder that life with brittle bones is unpredictable. 2 weeks before the start of the fall semester, I fell and broke my left femur. And there I was, less than a year out from the Rio Games with a broken femur. Am I going to panic? Will I let it overcome me? No. I have this tool called my Unbreakable mindset. So I thought about the things that I could control. I had surgery to stabilize the fracture so I could continue training. I relearned how to care for myself and returned to school for the semester, but my control really came back when I got back in the pool 2 weeks after my surgery. I was definitely starting from square one, but it was progress. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and I was finally back training at the normal speeds I had before I broke my femur. Months went by, and at this point, we were now 3 weeks out from the Rio trials. This is when my next challenge would come for me. One night in my dorm, a fire alarm went off, and as I was going down the stairs, I slid, and I landed on my left arm. And I immediately knew what I had done. I had broken my left shoulder 3 weeks out from the Rio trials. And I found myself once again in a familiar place. Would I panic? Would I let it overcome me? No. I've got my unbreakable mindset. And so I thought about what I could control. I returned to the pool that very next day and I kicked, and slowly I added my left arm back into training. And I arrived at those Rio trials 3 weeks later, both mentally and physically stronger because of what I had been through. I would go on to qualify for those Rio Games, my second Paralympic Games, and not 1, but 5 individual events this time with a broken shoulder. And so I spent that entire summer preparing for the Rio Games and had finally come time to leave for our prep camp in Houston, Texas. That would be a week of final preparations and bonding for Team USA. But at our very last training session before leaving for Brazil, I felt a pop in my side. Again, I immediately knew what I had done. I had broken 3 ribs the night before we left for Brazil. Here I am once again. Will I let this overcome me? No. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I changed up my final training routine, and I decided I would take it one event at a time in Rio. And competing at those Rio Games was one of the hardest, most painful things I've ever done, but it was also the most rewarding. I walked away from the Rio Games winning 3 golds and a silver medal with broken ribs. And as I stood on top of the podium with a gold medal around my neck, listening to our anthem and watching our flag being raised, I couldn't help but get emotional. They said I would never crawl, sit, stand, walk. And here I was, on top of the world. As I came off the podium and celebrated in the stands with my family, I couldn't help but think it doesn't get much better than this, but I was wrong. As I was in the stands, I met a young lady in a pink wheelchair and her mother, and it turns out she also had brittle bones. She had traveled all across Brazil just to watch me swim. And she said, from watching me, that she knew she could do anything. And that was better than any gold medal I could ever win. 4 years prior at the London Games, the motto had been Inspire Generation, and I experienced living proof of that in Rio. After the Rio Games, I kept training, I kept competing, I graduated from college, and I even started working at Loyola for the campus attorney on disability advocacy. And this confirmed my childhood dream of wanting to one day be a disability rights lawyer. Everything was going really well in my life, both in and out of the pool, as I looked towards the Tokyo Games, excited to defend my Rio titles. But just as life with brittle bones is unpredictable, so is life in general. As the COVID-19 pandemic started, there was a lot of uncertainty as to whether we would even have a Tokyo Games. Months went by without much news, and finally, news of a postponement came. The Tokyo Games would take place 1 year later in 2021. And as I read that news, I felt a familiar feeling. Would I let this overcome me? Could I do another year? I chose to use my unbreakable mindset, and I looked at the things I could control. I continued training without access to an actual pool. I took the LSAT, the law school admissions test. I applied to law school. And as competitions came back, I was competing again, even attending the Tokyo trials and qualifying for my 3rd Paralympic Games in 4 individual events in the middle of a global pandemic. Not to mention, I would get into every single law school I applied to. Wow. And all of this is only possible because I have my unbreakable mindset. So when I look back at my life, I see the pieces that made my unbreakable mindset. I see my parents' determination. I see physical therapy, aquatherapy, swimming. But most of all, I see every fracture, every surgery, every setback. And I realize I could have let those things keep me from living. I could have let them keep me from swimming. But instead, I used them to create my unbreakable mindset, which made my brittle bones my greatest asset. Everyone will go through some sort of adversity or obstacles in their lives, and they all look different. Mine are brittle bones, yours might be completely different, but we all share something in common: how we view those challenges and how we overcome them. So I want to challenge all of you. Create your own unbreakable mindset and start to see the things that happen in your life as things that happen for you rather than to you. Because you never know where that kind of mindset might take you. Thank you.